Ime remembers everything. Every spark of starfire, every whispered prayer into the void, every civilization that reached toward eternity only to crumble into dust. The universe is patient. It does not mourn the passing of empires, does not celebrate their rise. It simply endures, vast and indifferent, a canvas upon which countless species paint their brief and burning stories before fading into silence.
Sentinel Warden Fesamir had stood watch over the convergence for 6,000 years. Her kind, the archivists, measured time not in seasons or solar cycles, but in the rise and fall of younger civilizations. She had seen species take their first tentative steps into the dark between stars. She had seen them bloom into glittering federations. And she had seen them collapse, always with the same tragic inevitability, crushed beneath their own hubris or consumed by forces they could not comprehend. Now she stood in the archive's central sanctuary, a cathedral of living crystal that resonated with the accumulated knowledge of 300 species across 40 millennia. The chamber was silent except for the soft harmonic hum of the data crystals, each one containing the complete history of a civilization. Some crystals still pulsed with light, others had gone dark, their peoples extinct, their stories complete.
Fesamir's own crystal, marked with the symbol of the archivists, the eternal witnesses, still glowed with steady amber light. But she wondered, as she had wondered increasingly these past few months, how much longer it would continue to burn.
The Reavers had changed everything. They had emerged from the interstellar abyss 18 months ago, a fleet of ships unlike anything in the Archive's records. Not biological, not truly mechanical, something in between, something wrong, constructed from principles that violated the established laws of physics and powered by energies that made archivist sensors scream warnings of impossible mass-to-energy ratios. The Reavers did not communicate, did not negotiate. They simply appeared at the edges of inhabited systems and began to dismantle them. Planets stripped of their atmospheres, suns drained of their fusion, populations erased not through genocide, but through something far more efficient, absolute matter reclamation. Entire civilizations reduced to their component atoms and absorbed into the Reaver fleet, fuel for expansion. 14 species had fallen in the first year. Species the archivists had guided and nurtured for millennia. The Meln, with their beautiful crystalline city ships. The Vorth Collective, 500 million souls linked in a philosophical network spanning 30 systems. The gentle whispering tides, who had spent 10,000 years terraforming barren worlds into gardens. All gone. All reduced to raw materials. And now the Reavers were 3 systems away from the convergence itself. Fesamir turned from the sanctuary as footsteps echoed behind her. Young Teleth approached, his crest feathers trembling with exhaustion. He was barely 200 years old, practically a child by archivist standards, but recent losses had elevated him to positions he was not ready to hold. "Sentinel Warden," he said quietly, "the Council has returned their responses." Fesamir closed her eyes. She already knew. The weight of inevitability pressed against her like deep ocean water. "Tell me." The Talviri Union is consolidating their remaining forces around their core worlds. They will not, cannot spare ships for the Convergence's defense. Coleth's voice was carefully neutral. The synthesists have retreated to their fortress systems and sealed their quantum gates. The Eternal Flame Concordate expressed sympathies. Of course they had. The old alliances, forged over millennia of cooperation and shared discovery, had shattered the moment the Reavers appeared. Each species now thought only of its own survival. The convergence, that sacred place where knowledge was preserved and wisdom shared, was being abandoned to its fate.
And the distress beacon? Thesamir asked, though she already knew this answer too.
Broadcasting on all frequencies across known space. We've been transmitting for 72 hours. Caliph hesitated. No one is coming, Sentinel Warden. The Convergence has 8,000 inhabitants, 3 research vessels that were never designed for combat. Our defense platforms can delay the Reavers for perhaps 6 hours before being overwhelmed. We don't have time to evacuate everyone.
Thesamir looked back at the glowing crystals. 40,000 years of accumulated knowledge, the hopes and dreams and discoveries of hundreds of species. The archivists had protected these records through wars and plagues and natural disasters, through the collapse of entire galactic civilizations. They had endured because they believed knowledge was sacred, that memory mattered, that as long as someone remembered, nothing was truly lost.
But there would be no one left to remember if the Reavers came.
Prepare the deep archives for emergency broadcast transmission, she said quietly. If we cannot preserve the physical records, at least we can scatter the data into space. Perhaps someone, someday, will find it.
Yes, Sentinel Warden. Caliph turned to leave, then paused. There was one response to the beacon. Just came through.
Thesamir's hearts quickened despite herself.
From whom?
It claims to be from the Terran Systems Alliance. The humans.
The name hung in the air like smoke. Thesamir felt something cold settle in her chest. The humans. The quarantined species. The aggressive newcomers who had violated so many of the Convergence's principles that the Council had officially restricted all contact with them 2 centuries ago. Thesamir herself had endorsed the quarantine. She remembered the debates, remembered her own testimony before the Council. Humanity had appeared in the galaxy with salvaged technology they barely understood, spreading through space with reckless speed and dangerous naivety. They fought wars among themselves, even as they established colonies. They modified their own genetics, built artificial intelligences, detonated stellar masses for resource extraction. They were unpredictable, violent, and utterly unwilling to accept the Convergence's guidance on acceptable technological development. They were, by every measure the archivists used, a danger to themselves and potentially to others. Children playing with antimatter bombs.
Play the message, Thesamir said.
Caliph activated the holographic display. The image that appeared was human, shorter than an archivist, bipedal, mammalian. Male, if Thesamir remembered their dimorphism correctly. He wore a dark uniform with minimal decoration, his expression serious but not hostile.
This is Commander Jackson Hart of the TSA Vanguard Fleet. We've received your distress signal and analyzed your situation. We're dispatching forces to your location. Transmitting our approach vector now. Hold position. We're on our way.
The message ended. No platitudes, no questions about the Convergence's decades of isolation and condemnation. Just a simple statement of intent.
They're coming? Caliph sounded uncertain. But the humans are under quarantine. They have no obligation to...
They have no obligation at all, Thesamir agreed, which makes this either an act of remarkable compassion or a strategic opportunity they intend to exploit. She studied the frozen image of Commander Hart. His face showed stress, but also something else, a kind of weary determination. How long until the Reavers reach us?
48 hours. Perhaps less.
And how long until the human ships arrive?
Caliph checked the transmitted coordinates. According to their vector, approximately 36 hours. They'd be here before the Reavers. He looked at Thesamir. If they're actually coming, if this isn't some kind of cruel jest.
Thesamir considered. Humans had a reputation for many things: violence, adaptability, stubbornness, but not for cruelty without purpose. If they said they were coming, they likely meant it. The question was why, and what they expected in return.
Send them our complete tactical data on the Reavers, she said. Everything we've observed about their weapons, tactics, and fleet composition. If they're genuinely trying to help, they'll need intelligence. And begin preparations for possible evacuation. If the humans can buy us time, we may be able to get the archives out.
And if they fail?
Then at least someone tried to answer our call.
The next 36 hours passed in a strange fugue state. The Convergence's inhabitants, scholars, researchers, archivists from a dozen species, went about their evacuation preparations with quiet efficiency. Priority data was copied to portable storage, personal effects were gathered, goodbyes were said, though no one wanted to acknowledge they might be final.
The Samir spent most of that time in the sanctuary, walking among the crystal records and trying to memorize them, as if memory could preserve what matter could not. She touched the crystal representing the whispering tides and felt its faint warmth, the last echo of a species that had loved beauty above all else. She stood before the Vorth Collective's crystal and remembered their debates on the nature of consciousness, conversations that had lasted decades and enriched everyone who participated.
All gone now, and soon, perhaps, these crystals would be gone too, ground into component atoms by the Reavers' incomprehensible machines.
Sentinel Warden, Calith's voice came through her communicator. Long-range sensors are detecting FTL signatures, multiple contacts. They're human ships. Thesamir hurried to the observation deck. Through the crystalline walls, she could see the stars, and emerging from the dark between them, the human fleet.
She had expected perhaps a dozen ships, a token force to maintain plausible deniability if things went badly. What emerged from FTL were over 100 vessels, and they were unlike any warships she had seen in the Archive's records. Archivist ships were elegant, organic in design, built to inspire and educate. The old Council battle fleets had been massive and imposing, designed to project authority. The human ships were neither. They were functional to the point of brutality, angular, armored, festooned with weapon systems and sensor arrays. They moved with predatory grace, taking up defensive positions around the Convergence with practiced efficiency.
Receiving transmission, Calith said. Commander Hart's image appeared again, this time on the observation deck's main display. Sentinel Warden Thesamir, I'm Commander Hart of the Vanpard Fleet. We've established a defensive perimeter around your position. My science teams have reviewed your data on the Reavers. We're preparing countermeasures. I'd like to meet with you in person if you're willing. We have a lot to discuss and not much time. Thesamir found her voice. Commander, I must confess I'm surprised by your response. The Convergence and the Terran Systems Alliance have not maintained friendly relations.
No, you haven't, Hart agreed, and there was no bitterness in his voice, just statement of fact. But that doesn't change what needs to be done. You activated a distress beacon. We heard it. We're here. Everything else is just history.
The simplicity of it struck Thesamir silent for a moment. Very well, Commander. I'll meet you aboard your flagship.
Actually, I'd prefer to come to you. I'd like to see the Convergence. Our intelligence on your facility is limited, for obvious reasons.
Because they had been forbidden to approach.
because the archivists had declared them too dangerous to be trusted with the galaxy's accumulated knowledge. Thesimir felt a flush of shame. Of course, you're welcome here. Commander Hart arrived 2 hours later with a small escort, 3 officers and a handful of what appeared to be technical specialists. They moved through the Convergence's corridors with quiet respect, not touching anything, but clearly observing everything. Hart himself was shorter than Thesimir, as most humans were, but he carried himself with the kind of controlled confidence that came from facing and surviving terrible situations. His eyes, when they met hers, were intelligent and assessing, but not hostile.
"Thank you for receiving us," he said. "I know the circumstances are less than ideal."
That's putting it mildly, Commander. Thesimir gestured toward the conference chamber she had prepared. Please. They settled around a table that adjusted to accommodate both archivist and human physiology. Hart's technical specialists immediately began interfacing with the Convergence's networks, pulling up data on the Reavers with practiced efficiency. I'll be direct, Hart said. We've been tracking the Reaver expansion for the past year. We've studied every engagement, analyzed every known encounter. We know what they're capable of. He pulled up a holographic display showing Reaver fleet movements. They're not organic. They're not synthetic in any conventional sense. Best we can determine, they're some kind of post-singularity weapon system, probably designed by a civilization that died out millions of years ago. We've come to similar conclusions, Thesimir said, though the archives contain no records of the species that might have created them. That's because whoever made them was thorough. They wanted to erase everything. The Reavers are tools of absolute destruction. Hart's expression was grim. But they're not invincible. They follow patterns, they have limitations, and we've found ways to exploit both. You fought them? 3 times. Lost a lot of good people learning how. Hart's jaw tightened. But we learned. The Reavers adapt slowly. They expect conventional resistance, shields, energy weapons, traditional tactics. They're not prepared for what we bring. Which is? Everything. Hart met her eyes. Sentinel Warden, humanity doesn't fight fair. We never have. We can't afford to. When you grow up on a death world where everything from the weather to the biology is trying to kill you, you learn that survival means using every advantage, every trick, every dirty tactic you can think of. The Reavers are deadly, but they're predictable, and predictability is a weakness we know how to exploit. Thesimir felt a chill run through her. This was what the Convergence had feared about humanity. This pragmatic willingness to discard rules and conventions, to fight without honor or restraint. But for the first time, she found herself wondering if perhaps that fear had been misplaced. The Reavers cared nothing for honor. They simply erased. Against that, humanity's ruthless practicality seemed not dangerous, but necessary.
"How many ships do you have here?" she asked.
This is Vanguard Fleet 7, 112 vessels, mostly heavy cruisers and destroyers with support craft. The Reaver fleet approaching us numbers over 300 ships. I'm aware. Hart smiled, and there was something unsettling about it. Not cruel, but certain. Numbers aren't everything, Sentinel Warden. We're not here to match them ship for ship. We're here to break them. One of Hart's officers, a woman with sharp eyes and quick hands, spoke up. We've analyzed their approach vector. They're coming in on a predictable trajectory, confident in their superiority. They haven't encountered coordinated resistance in months. They're overconfident. And that will kill them, Hart added. But I need you to understand something, Sentinel Warden. This battle is going to be brutal. We're going to use weapons and tactics that might shock you, things the Convergence Council explicitly condemned when they issued the quarantine against us. We won't apologize for that, but I wanted you to know in advance. Thesimir looked at this human commander who had brought his fleet across the galaxy to defend people who had rejected his species. Commander Hart, at this point, I'm willing to accept any methods that preserve the Convergence and its archives. Do what you must. Then let me show you what we've planned. Over the next 8 hours, Commander Hart and his staff briefed Thesimir on their strategy. She listened with growing amazement and, if she was honest with herself, growing horror. The humans had weaponized principles of physics that the Convergence had declared too dangerous to pursue. They had developed tactics that violated every convention of civilized warfare. They had prepared countermeasures that required sacrifices no archivist would have willingly made.
And every bit of it was brilliant.
We'll engage them in 3 waves, Hart explained, manipulating the tactical display. First wave is long-range kinetic bombardment. Nothing exotic, just mass accelerated to ridiculous velocities. The Reavers will barely notice. Their shields can handle it, but it will force them to commit energy to defense.
And then, second wave. We've developed what we call quantum disruptor mines. Nasty little things. They don't destroy matter. They temporarily destabilize the quantum foam that underlies space-time, creates pockets of severe causality violation. The Reaver's shields aren't designed to deal with that kind of attack because it doesn't technically qualify as a weapon under most species definitions.
That's... Thesimir struggled for words. That could create permanent spatial anomalies, tears in the fabric of reality itself.
It could, Hart agreed calmly, if we didn't know exactly what we were doing. We've tested these extensively. They're controllable. Mostly.
Mostly? There's always some risk, but it's managed risk, and it will shred their formations. Hart zoomed in on the display. Third wave is where it gets interesting. We close to knife fighting range and deploy swarm drones, millions of them. Each one is stupid individually, but they network and adapt in real time using distributed AI. The Reavers have never encountered adaptive swarm tactics. They won't know how to respond.
Distributed artificial intelligence? Caliph, who had been listening silently, spoke up. That was one of the technologies the Convergence specifically condemned, the risk of emergent sapience.
Is managed through strict protocols and kill switches, Hart interrupted. We're not stupid. We know the risks, but we also know they work. And right now, they're the best tool for the job.
Thesimir found herself looking at Commander Hart with new eyes. The Convergence had dismissed humanity as reckless children, but this was not recklessness. This was calculated, methodical preparation. They had studied the Reavers, identified weaknesses, and developed countermeasures without regard for conventional restrictions. They had done what the archivists, bound by their own rules and ancient prohibitions, could not.
When the Reavers arrive, she asked quietly, what are our chances?
Hart was silent for a moment. Honestly, unknown. We've never faced a fleet this size. But I can tell you this, they've never faced us either, and we have something they don't.
What's that?
A reason to fight. They're just programmed to consume. We're fighting to protect something that matters. That gives us an edge they can't match.
The Reavers arrived 12 hours later, emerging from FTL in a formation that spoke of absolute confidence. Their ships were vast and irregular, looking more like tumors than vessels, their surfaces crawling with incomprehensible structures that pulsed with sickly light.
The Samir watched from the Convergence's observation deck as the human fleet moved to intercept. The contrast was stark. The Reavers' chaotic organic horror versus humanity's cold geometric precision.
Commander Hart's voice came through the comm system, calm and controlled. All ships, this is Vanguard Actual. Targets are in range. Execute Wave Alpha.
The human ships opened fire simultaneously. Thesamir's sensors registered thousands of projectiles launched at incredible velocities. Simple kinetic weapons, chunks of dense matter accelerated to near light speed. They streaked across space, too fast to track individually, and slammed into the Reaver fleet. The Reaver's shields flared, absorbing the impacts with contemptuous ease. A few projectiles got through, punching holes in armored hulls, but the damage was minimal. The Reaver fleet didn't even slow down.
Phase 1 complete. Hart's voice remained steady. Enemy shields are committed. Execute Wave Bravo.
A different kind of launch. Smaller objects, barely visible to sensors, dispersing through space like seeds on the wind. They positioned themselves in a three-dimensional grid around the Reaver fleet. Thousands of tiny platforms holding position.
Activating quantum disruptors.
Space screamed. Thesamir had never experienced anything like it. Her sensors went mad, registering impossible readings. Where the disruptor minds activated, reality itself seemed to stutter and fracture. The Reaver shields, designed to deflect energy and resist kinetic force, had no defense against attacks that temporarily made physics optional. Reaver ships began tearing themselves apart. Not from external damage, but from internal contradictions. Quantum states resolving incorrectly, creating devastating matter-antimatter reactions deep in their cores. Entire vessels imploded or exploded, or simply ceased to exist as causality broke down. The Reaver formation fractured. Ships tried to maneuver away from the anomaly zones, but the disruptor grid had been positioned with malicious precision. Every path led through more disrupted space.
They're adapting, Hart's tactical officer reported, reconfiguring shields to compensate for quantum fluctuations. Expected, Hart replied. They're smart, but adaptation takes time. Execute Wave Charlie.
The human ships accelerated forward, closing the distance to the Reaver's fleet with reckless speed. Thesamir gasped. At this range, the Reaver's devastating close-range weapons would shred them, but the human ships didn't slow. They dove into the chaos like predators scenting blood.
And then they released the swarms.
Millions of tiny drones erupted from the human vessels, each one barely larger than Thesamir's hand. They moved with insect-like precision, swarming over and around and through the Reaver ships. Individual drones were destroyed by the thousands, but for every one lost, 10 more took its place.
The swarms didn't just attack randomly, they coordinated, finding weak points in the Reaver's already stressed hulls, exploiting damage from the quantum disruptions, working together to tear apart ships from the inside. Thesamir watched as a massive Reaver capital ship, 10 times the size of any human vessel, was systematically dismantled by a cloud of tiny attackers that moved like a single organism.
The Reavers tried to fight back. Their weapons carved swaths through the drone swarms, destroying drones by the millions. But the swarms adapted faster than the Reavers could respond, changing tactics, varying approaches, learning from every destroyed drone and sharing that knowledge through their distributed network. And underneath the swarm assault, the human ships pressed their attack. Their weapons were brutal and effective: plasma lances, nuclear-pumped masers, antimatter torpedoes. Nothing elegant, nothing sophisticated, just overwhelming, calculated violence applied with surgical precision. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Reaver fleet was gone. Not retreated, not defeated, gone. Reduced to scattered debris and rapidly cooling plasma clouds. The quantum anomalies collapsed as the disruptor mines exhausted their power, leaving space scarred but stable. The human fleet had survived. Damaged, certainly,
Thesamir's sensors showed dozens of ships with critical damage, a few that would never fly again. But they had survived, and they had won. Commander Hart's voice came through the comm, and for the first time she heard the exhaustion beneath his controlled tone. Convergence Station, this is Vanguard Actual. Threat neutralized. You're secure. Beginning damage assessment and rescue operations for our casualties. We'll maintain position until we're certain you're safe. Thesamir found she couldn't speak, couldn't process what she had just witnessed. An enemy that had destroyed 14 civilizations, reduced to debris in 4 hours by a species the Convergence had dismissed as too primitive to be worth engagement. Kalith spoke into the silence. Sentinel Warden, what do we do? We say thank you, Thesamir replied quietly, and then we learn. Over the following weeks, as the human fleet remained in position and repairs were conducted, Thesamir spent hours in conversation with Commander Hart. She found him to be thoughtful, pragmatic, and surprisingly well-educated in galactic history. He knew about the Convergence's mission, understood its importance, and asked intelligent questions about the archives. "Why did you come?" she asked him one evening as they sat in the sanctuary surrounded by the glowing crystals. "The Convergence has done nothing but condemn your species for 2 centuries. We've denied you access to our knowledge, declared you dangerous, actively worked to isolate you. Why risk your ships and your people for us?" Hart was quiet for a long moment, studying the crystals. "Because you needed help," he said finally. "It's really that simple. Yeah, you've treated us like pariahs. Yeah, the quarantine has cost us opportunities and limited our growth. But when your distress beacon activated, none of that mattered. You needed help. We could provide it. That's the only calculation that counts." Many species would have used this as leverage, demanded concessions in exchange for aid. "Some humans probably would have," Hart admitted. "But that's not what the TSA stands for. We learned a long time ago that survival isn't just about individual advantage. It's about building systems where people help each other, because that's what makes everyone stronger. You activate a distress beacon, we come running. Simple as that." Thesamir touched one of the crystals, feeling its warmth. "I thought I understood humanity. The archives have extensive records on your species' history, the wars, the atrocities, the near-extinction events you've inflicted on yourselves. I used that history to justify the quarantine." "You weren't wrong," Hart said quietly. "We've done terrible things. We're capable of terrible things. But that history also taught us why we can't keep doing them. Every war, every atrocity, every near miss with extinction, we learned from them. Slowly, painfully, but we learned. And one of the things we learned is that the only thing that really matters is what you do when someone needs help. The weapons you used, the tactics, they violated every principle the Convergence holds sacred." "I know, and if you want to condemn us for that, I understand. But those Reavers didn't care about your principles. They would have erased this place and everyone in it without a second thought. Sometimes the only way to preserve what you value is to fight with everything you have. Principles be damned." Thesamir looked at him. "You frighten me, Commander. Your species frightens me. The ease with which you deploy weapons of such terrible power. The willingness to risk fundamental violations of physical law. The cold calculations beneath your warmth." "Good," Hart said, and there was no malice in it. "You should be frightened. We're dangerous. Every spacefaring species is dangerous. But we may be more than most because we learned early that the universe doesn't care about fair. But here's the thing, Sentinel Warden. We direct that danger outward, at threats, at things that would harm the people and principles we protect, not at those who need help." "How can I know that?" "You can't, not with certainty.
but judge us by our actions. We came when you called. We fought to protect you. And now we're staying to make sure you're truly safe before we leave. That's who we are." In the end, it was not Commander Hart who convinced Thesamir. It was watching the human crews work. She observed as they repaired not just their own ships, but also the Convergence's damaged systems. She watched them interact with the archivist researchers, answering questions with patience and genuine interest. She saw them mourn their dead, 117 killed in the battle, with quiet dignity, and then return to their duties. They were, she realized, exactly what they claimed to be. Dangerous, yes. Ruthless when necessary, certainly. But also compassionate, reliable, and committed to principles that mattered. Before Hart left with his fleet, Thesamir met with him one final time. "I'm going to recommend to the Council that the quarantine be lifted," she said. "It will take time. The Convergence moves slowly, and there will be opposition, but I will advocate for it." Hart smiled. "I appreciate that, Sentinel Warden, but even if the quarantine stands, it doesn't change anything. You need help again? You activate that beacon. We'll come." "I know you will," Thesamir said. "And that terrifies me more than the Reavers ever did, because it means we were wrong about you. And if we were wrong about this, what else have we been wrong about?"
"Maybe that's not a bad question to ask yourself," Hart replied.
3 months later, long after the human fleet had departed, sensors detected another Reaver incursion, this one targeting the Talveri Union, one of the Convergence's oldest allied species. The Union had 50,000 years of history. It faced extinction. The Talveri Council activated their distress beacon. Human warships arrived within 26 hours. Not Vanguard Fleet 7 this time, Vanguard Fleet 3, twice as large, equipped with updated weapons based on lessons learned at the Convergence. They engaged the Reavers with the same terrible efficiency, the same cold precision.
And they won.
Then it happened again. The synthesists under attack. Their beacon activated. Human ships followed. Victory. Again, the eternal flame concordate. Beacon. Humans. Victory. A pattern emerged. Across the embattled regions of known space, species that had dismissed or ignored or actively condemned humanity found themselves with a terrible choice: accept extinction or activate their distress beacons and hope.
And every single time a beacon activated, human warships followed.
They didn't ask for payment, didn't demand concessions, didn't even ask for thanks. They just came, fought, won, and left, over and over, with machine-like reliability. Thesamir watched it unfold from the Convergence, adding new records to the archives. The human crystal now pulsed with brilliant light, brighter than it had ever been. And beside it, she placed a new crystal, one that recorded a simple truth, that the Convergence had taken 40,000 years to learn. That strength without compassion is merely brutality, that knowledge without application is merely data, that civilization is measured not by what you know, but by what you do when someone calls for help. The distress beacon activated. Human warships followed. And that, Thesamir came to understand, was everything that mattered.